Carl Jung was born in 1875 in a small town called Keswill, on the shore of Lake Constance. His father was a pastor, and his mother came from a long line of teachers. From an early age, he saw the world as a place full of symbols. He liked to draw pictures of the trees and the lake, and he would tell his friends stories about the shapes he saw in the clouds. Those early drawings later became a clue to the way his mind worked. When Jung was a teenager, he started to keep a diary. He wrote about his dreams, about the feelings that rose when he read a poem, and about the strange images that visited him at night. In one entry, he described a night when a black horse ran across a field of wheat. He did not know why the image mattered, but he felt it was important. The diary habit stayed with him for the rest of his life and gave him a tool to look inside his own mind. Jung went to university in Basel to study medicine. He chose medicine because he wanted to help people who were sick in body and mind. He finished his studies in 1900 and then took a job at the Bergolsli Psychiatric Clinic in Zurich. The clinic was run by Eugen Bleuler, a doctor who liked to talk about the word schizophrenia. At Bergolsli, Jung met many patients who heard voices, who saw strange pictures, and who could not fit into normal life. He learned to listen to their stories without judging them. He wrote in his notes, "The patient's mind is a garden, and the therapist must walk gently among the plants." This time at the clinic taught him that the mind holds many hidden parts. In 1907, Jung met Sigmund Freud for the first time. Freud was a doctor from Vienna who had written a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. Freud believed that all human behavior comes from hidden wishes, especially wishes about sex and power. Jung was curious about Freud's ideas. He wrote a letter to Freud that said, "Your work on the unconscious has opened a new road for me." Freud invited Jung to join a group of doctors who wanted to study the unconscious together. Jung traveled to Vienna and sat in a small room with Freud, listening to the older doctor's theories. He felt both excitement and doubt. The first meetings between Jung and Freud were friendly, but also tense. Freud called the unconscious the dark side of the mind, while Jung saw it as a place full of images, myths, and symbols. Jung remembered a conversation where Freud said, "All dreams are wish fulfillments." Jung answered, "Some dreams are warnings, some are memories of the past, and some are stories that belong to the whole of humanity." This small disagreement grew into a larger split. Jung began to study myths from many cultures. He read stories about gods, heroes, and monsters from Greece, Egypt, India, and the native peoples of North America. He saw a pattern in these stories that he called the cultic unconscious. He said that the collective unconscious is a part of the mind that all people share, a store of images that appear in dreams and art across time. He wrote, "The symbols that arise in the mind are not made by one person alone. They belong to all of us." Not everyone agreed with Jung's new ideas. One counterargument came from Freud's followers. They said that Jung was moving away from scientific proof and into the realm of fantasy. They argued that talking about myths made the theory too vague to test. They wrote, "If the unconscious is a shared garden of symbols, how can a doctor measure the size of the garden?" This criticism suggested that Jung's break from Freud weakened the scientific base of psychoanalysis. A second counterargument came from scholars who studied religion. They said that Jung gave too much power to myth. They claimed that myths are cultural stories that change over time, not timeless images stored in the brain. They asked, why should a story about a dragon in China be treated the same as a story about a dragon in Europe? This line of thought questioned whether Jung's focus on myth made his theory less useful for understanding modern patients. Jung's own life gave him examples that supported his ideas. In 1913, he traveled to a place called the East African coast, near a town called Mombasa. He went there with a friend to study the customs of the local people. While he watched a dance, he saw a mask with a face that looked like the one he had drawn as a child, the same shape of a horse that had run across his diary field of wheat. He wrote, "The mask reminded me of my own inner picture, as if the outer world had handed me a mirror." This experience convinced him that symbols could appear in different cultures and still feel personal. Back at the Bergolzli clinic, Jung treated a young woman who kept drawing circles on paper. She said the circles were the sun that never set. Jung listened and asked her what the circles meant to her. She replied that they were the memory of a summer she spent by a lake, when the sun seemed to stay forever. Jung saw this as an example of a personal symbol, a picture that came from her own life, but also as a hint of a larger image of light that many people feel. Jung's ideas about the collective unconscious have been used in many fields. In art, teachers ask students to look at their own pictures and find the hidden story behind the shapes. In therapy, doctors ask patients to write in a diary, just like the teenager who wrote about a black horse, and then look for recurring images. In business, managers use Jung's concept of archetype, a word that means a typical pattern of behavior, to understand how people react to brands. For example, a company that sells adventure gear may use the hero archetype, because many people see themselves as explorers in a story. Modern scholars have tried to test Jung's ideas with brain scans. They have found that when people look at mythic images, the same parts of the brain light up, whether the person is from Europe or Africa. This suggests that there may be a shared way the brain reacts to certain symbols. However, critics point out that brain activity can be influenced by many things, and that the results do not prove Jung's theory. Jung also wrote about a process he called individuation. He said it is the path each person takes to become a whole self, by meeting the hidden parts of the mind and bringing them into light. He used a simple picture: a tree that has roots deep in the earth and branches reaching the sky. He said, "Well, the tree grows when the roots and the branches work together." This image helps people see that growth means accepting both the dark and the bright parts of themselves. One more anecdote from Jung's early career shows his gentle approach. While working at the Bergolzli clinic, he met a patient who was terrified of fire. The patient said that the fire reminded him of a house that burned when he was 5. Jung did not tell the patient to ignore the fear. Instead, he asked the patient to draw the fire. The patient drew a small candle, a big blaze, and a phoenix rising from the ashes. Jung saw the phoenix as a symbol of renewal. He said, "The patient's mind turned a painful memory into a hopeful image." This story illustrates how Jung used art and symbols to help patients heal. Jung's break from Freud also changed the way psychoanalysis spread. After 1913, the two doctors wrote letters that grew colder. Jung started his own group called the Psychology Club, where he invited people who were interested in myth, art, and religion. He invited a painter named Emil Nolde, who used bright colors to show inner feelings. Nolde said, "Through Jung's ideas, let my brush speak the language of the soul." This shows that Jung's ideas reached beyond medicine into the world of creativity. In a letter to Freud, Jung wrote, "I respect your work, but I must follow the path that my own inner voice shows." Freud replied, "The path you walk is far from the road we built together." Their letters are now studied as a turning point in the history of psychology. To sum up, Jung's early life, his medical training at the Bergolzli clinic, and his first meetings with Freud all shaped his view of the mind. The child who drew pictures and the teenager who wrote in a diary become simple ways to show how inner images can guide a person. The African trip of 1913 and the work with patients at the clinic give real examples of how Jung saw symbols everywhere. Counter-arguments about the lack of scientific proof and the focus on myth remind the audience that Jung's ideas are still debated. Modern uses in art, therapy, and business show that his thoughts continue to matter. And the quotes from Jung and Freud give a voice to the historic conversation that still echoes in today's study of the mind. Jung saw the unconscious as a deep lake that sits under the surface of everyday thoughts. The water is calm most of the time, but it holds currents that can pull a small object from the bottom and bring it to the light. He compared this lake to a kitchen pantry hidden behind a door. Most people never open the pantry, but food, spices and tools sit there ready to be used when needed. In the same way, the unconscious keeps memories, feelings and images stored away, waiting for a moment when they become useful. Another picture Jung used was a computer that runs many background processes while a person works on a document. The user does not see the processes, but they keep the system running smoothly. The unconscious works like those hidden programs, sorting, connecting, and sometimes surprising the mind with a new idea. A simple example of this hidden work is the moment when a name slips from memory. A person may try to recall the name of a teacher from years ago, but the word stays out of reach. Then, while walking past a billboard, the name pops up like a bubble rising from the lake. The sudden appearance shows how the unconscious stored the name and released it when a cue matched the hidden pattern. A second everyday case is the sudden recall of a song that has not been heard for years. A person may be washing dishes when a scent of fresh bread triggers a melody from childhood. The tune comes back fully formed, even though the person has not thought about it for a long time. This flash of memory is another sign that the unconscious was listening, ready to bring the music forward when the right smell acted as a key. Jung called this hidden part of the mind the personal unconscious. It holds everything that has been forgotten, suppressed, or never fully entered conscious awareness. He also believed in a larger layer called the collective unconscious. This deeper level contains images and patterns that all humans share, like ancient symbols that appear in myths across cultures. Jung described these shared images as archetypes, simple forms that shape how people see the world. To illustrate the idea of archetypes, Jung pointed to the image of the mother. In many stories, a mother appears as a caring figure, a protector, or sometimes a source of danger. The same shape shows up in a mother goddess statue from ancient Egypt, a fairy tale about a witch, and a modern film about a nurturing robot. Jung argued that these similar images arise because the collective unconscious stores a basic pattern that each culture draws from. Jung's view of the unconscious was not only theoretical. He spent many years working with patients who showed strange physical symptoms, what doctors of his time called hysteria. In one case, a young woman would suddenly lose the ability to move her right arm whenever she felt angry. Jung listened to her story, asked her to draw pictures, and noticed that the drawings often contained a dark, winding river. He suggested that the river represented a hidden feeling of being swept away. When the patient began to talk about that feeling, the arm weakness faded. This episode showed Jung how the unconscious could hide a conflict in the body, and how making the hidden image conscious could heal it. Another historical anecdote involves a painter who kept using the same strange symbol in many works. The painter, a friend of Jung's, would place a small three-pointed star in the background of landscapes, still lifes and portraits. Jung asked the artist to keep a journal of his dreams. In the journal, the painter described a recurring dream of a night sky where three bright points shone over a calm sea. Jung recognized the star as an archetype of the self, a symbol of wholeness that appears in many cultures. By pointing this out, Jung helped the painter understand why the star kept appearing, and the painter felt a new sense of purpose in his work. Jung's ideas have been used in many modern settings. Therapists often ask clients to keep a dream diary, a simple notebook where they write down any dreams they remember. The diary works like a small net that catches images from the unconscious lake, allowing the therapist and the client to see patterns. In marketing, companies sometimes use archetype theory to shape brand images. A brand that wants to feel heroic may use symbols of strength and adventure, hoping to tap into the collective unconscious pattern of the hero archetype. Even in everyday life, the concept of the unconscious can help people understand why they sometimes react without thinking. A person may feel a sudden surge of anger when a coworker makes a joke about a past failure. The unconscious may be holding a memory of that failure, and the joke acts as a trigger that pulls the memory up. Recognizing the hidden cause can calm the reaction and prevent conflict. Critics, however, argue that the unconscious cannot be measured. One line of criticism comes from behaviorists who say that only observable actions count as science. They claim that because the unconscious cannot be directly seen or counted, it remains a poetic idea rather than a factual one. They point out that experiments on reaction time and stimulus response do not need to invoke an unseen lake to explain results. A second counterargument comes from modern neuroscience. Some brain researchers say that what Jung called the unconscious is simply brain activity that happens below the level of conscious awareness. They argue that brain scans can show which areas light up when a memory is retrieved, and that these patterns can be quantified. Because the unconscious is not a separate entity in the brain, they say, it is more accurate to speak of implicit processes rather than a hidden lake. Jung responded to these critiques by reminding people that the unconscious is not a thing that can be weighed on a scale. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This quote shows that Jung saw the unconscious as a force that shapes choices, not a physical object to be measured. He also said, "The most terrifying thing about the unconscious is that it is not a place to go, but a place to be." In this view, the unconscious is part of who a person is, not a separate room to be entered. Modern philosophers have taken Jung's ideas and blended them with new science. Some argue that the unconscious can be thought of as a set of probabilistic predictions that the brain makes without awareness. Others keep the lake image but describe it as a network of memories that self-organizes over time. In both cases, the core idea remains. There is a deep layer of mind that stores more than what is currently in focus. A practical analogy that fits the modern view is a garden that grows under a greenhouse. The gardener cannot see the roots, but the roots feed the plants above. If the gardener waters the soil, the hidden roots become stronger, and the visible flowers grow bigger. In the mind, the unconscious roots feed thoughts, feelings, and creativity. When a person practices meditation, writes in a journal, or talks with a therapist, they are watering the soil of the unconscious, allowing healthier growth. Consider another everyday scene. A person walks into a grocery store and suddenly feels a strong urge to buy a particular brand of chocolate. The brand is not on any shopping list, but a scent from a childhood birthday party brings the memory of a happy moment. The unconscious links the scent to the feeling of joy, and the brain nudges the person toward the chocolate. Understanding this link can help the person make a more mindful choice, perhaps buying a healthier snack instead. Jung's concept of the unconscious also appears in literature. In the novel The Catcher in the Rye, the main character often reacts to small events with big emotional swings. Some readers interpret these swings as the character's hidden memories of loss, surfacing from the unconscious lake. The idea helps explain why the character feels both detached and deeply hurt at the same time. In the field of education, teachers sometimes notice that a student who struggles with math suddenly solves a problem after hearing a song about numbers. The song may have unlocked a memory of a teacher's voice from years ago, stored in the unconscious. By recognizing this pattern, educators can use music, stories, or images to help students retrieve hidden knowledge. Jung also believed that the unconscious could guide people toward personal growth. He called this process individuation, a journey of becoming a whole person. The journey is like a diver who swims deeper into the lake, discovering hidden treasures and learning to live with them. The diver may find a pearl that represents a talent, or a stone that represents a fear. By bringing both to the surface, the diver learns to balance them. A well-known quote from Jung captures this idea. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. This line invites listeners to turn attention inward, to let the unconscious speak. It also shows why Jung's lake metaphor has stayed popular for so long. Even technology designers have borrowed the lake image. Some user experience researchers talk about latent needs, the hidden desires that users may not voice directly. By studying patterns of behavior, designers try to surface these latent needs, much like a diver pulling up a hidden object from the lake. The goal is to create products that feel intuitive, because they match the unconscious expectations of users. In daily life, the unconscious can appear in small, gentle ways. A person may reach for a warm blanket on a cold night without thinking about why. The unconscious remembers a childhood night when a mother wrapped a blanket around a shivering child. The memory, stored in the lake, guides the present action. Recognizing this link can bring a sense of gratitude and connection to the past. Jung's ideas also influence the way people think about dreams. He argued that dreams are messages from the unconscious, using symbols that need to be decoded. A dream about a broken bridge may symbolize a feeling of being stuck in a relationship. By writing down the dream and looking for personal meaning, a person can learn what the unconscious is trying to say. This practice has become common in many self-help books. Critics who focus on measurement sometimes miss the practical value of Jung's metaphor. Even if a scientist cannot weigh the lake, the metaphor can still help people understand why they feel certain ways. It provides a language for talking about hidden feelings, which can be a first step toward healing. Modern research on memory supports some of Jung's observations. Studies show that memories can be reactivated by cues that are not obvious, such as smells or sounds. This reactivation often happens without conscious effort, matching the idea that the unconscious stores images ready to surface. While the brain scans do not show a lake, they do show networks that fire when a cue appears, lending a scientific echo to Jung's picture. In therapy today, many clinicians use Jung's ideas alongside other approaches. They may ask a client to draw a picture of a safe place, then explore the symbols that appear. The client might draw a calm lake with a hidden door, and the therapist can discuss what the door represents. This process mirrors Jung's own work with patients who used art to express what words could not capture. One more historical anecdote highlights Jung's method. In the early 1900s, he met a young poet who kept writing about a black bird that appeared at night. Jung asked the poet to recall any childhood story about birds. The poet remembered a night when a raven perched on his window while his mother sang a lullaby. Jung suggested that the black bird was a symbol of the poet's hidden grief for his mother's death. After discussing this, the poet felt a release and began to write with a lighter tone. The episode shows how a simple symbol from the unconscious can shape a whole creative life. The concept of the unconscious continues to spark conversation. Some people use it as a guide for personal growth, while others see it as an outdated myth. Yet the lake metaphor remains useful, because it translates a complex inner world into an image that anyone can picture. Whether the lake is made of neural patterns, cultural symbols, or personal memories, the idea that something deeper influences thoughts and actions is hard to deny. In closing, Jung's view of the unconscious as a deep lake, a hidden pantry, and a background computer process offers a way to think about the unseen parts of the mind. The examples of forgetting a name and recalling a song show how the lake can bring up hidden items at the right moment. The historical anecdotes of hysteria patients and the painter's recurring star illustrate how Jung used real cases to prove his point. The counterarguments remind listeners that the unconscious is not easily measured, but they also highlight the value of a metaphor that can be felt even when it cannot be weighed. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. By listening to the quiet currents beneath the surface, a person may learn to steer the boat. Carl Jung began his work on the mind by looking for patterns that seem to appear in every culture. He called those patterns archetypes. An archetype is a basic shape of thought that lives in the deepest part of the human mind. Jung believed that the deepest part of the mind is shared by all people. He called this shared part the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is like a hidden store of images, feelings, and ideas that every person inherits. Jung wrote, "The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution." In this view, archetypes are the building blocks of that heritage. The idea of archetypes did not appear out of nowhere. The word itself comes from the Greek word arche, meaning beginning, and typos, meaning pattern. Early philosophers, such as Plato, talked about ideal forms that exist beyond the physical world. Plato said that the world we see is only a shadow of perfect ideas. Jung took that idea and turned it into a psychological model. He said that the mind has a set of universal patterns that shape how people see the world, how they act, and how they tell stories. One of the most well-known archetypes is the hero. The hero is the figure who leaves home, faces danger, and returns with a gift for the community. Another common archetype is the mother. The mother represents care, nourishment, and protection. A third classic archetype is the trickster. The trickster breaks rules, creates chaos, and often forces others to see new possibilities. These three roles appear in myths from ancient Egypt, in Norse sagas, in modern movies, and in everyday life. To see how archetypes work in daily life, imagine a sports coach. The coach gathers a group of players, gives them a plan, pushes them to train, and then leads them into a game. The coach fits the hero archetype because the coach steps forward, takes responsibility, and guides the team toward a goal. The coach also shows the mentor aspect of the hero, offering wisdom and support. In another everyday scene, picture a parent comforting a frightened child after a nightmare. The parent holds the child, speaks in a calm voice, and promises safety. This act matches the mother archetype. The parent provides the sense of security that the child needs, just as the mythic mother does for the hero on his journey. These simple scenes illustrate how archetypes shape behavior. They are not just stories that sit on a shelf. They are patterns that influence how people act and how they understand each other. When a coach steps onto the field, the players recognize the role and respond. When a parent comforts a child, the child feels the familiar safety of the mother figure. In both cases, the archetype helps the participants know what to expect and how to act. Jung did not stop at modern examples. He spent many years collecting myths, dreams, and symbols from different cultures. One of his most vivid studies involved the mandala. A mandala is a circular design that appears in many spiritual traditions. Jung first saw mandalas in his own dreams. He wrote that the mandala felt like a map of the self. He then asked his patients to draw mandalas. The drawings often showed a central point surrounded by a balanced pattern. Jung said that the mandala is an image of the self that reflects the desire for wholeness. He called the mandala an archetype of order and integration. The mandala shows how a single symbol can carry a deep meaning that many people share, even when they live far apart. Another important episode in Jung's research was his study of Native American myths. While traveling in the American Southwest, Jung met members of the Pueblo people. He listened to their stories about the trickster coyote and the creator spider-woman. He noticed that the trickster appeared not only in Pueblo tales, but also in African folklore, in Norse myths, and in modern cartoons. Jung wrote, "The trickster is a figure that appears wherever the human mind feels the need to break the old pattern." By comparing these myths, Jung argued that the trickster archetype lives in the collective unconscious, ready to surface when a culture needs change. Jung's ideas about archetypes have been used in many fields. In literature, teachers point out the hero's journey as a template for novels. In therapy, counselors ask patients to look at the images that appear in their dreams. When a patient sees a mother figure, the therapist may explore what that figure means for the patient's sense of safety. In marketing, advertisers use archetypal images to connect with audiences. A brand that wants to be seen as a guide may use the mentor archetype in its ads. In politics, leaders sometimes adopt the hero archetype, presenting themselves as saviors who will rescue the nation. Modern thinkers have taken Jung's ideas and given them new twists. Some psychologists argue that archetypes are useful shortcuts that the brain uses to process information quickly. They say that when a person sees a figure that looks like a hero, the brain automatically activates expectations about bravery and leadership. Others point out that the brain builds patterns from experience, so archetypes may be the result of learned cultural exposure rather than a hidden store. Critics also raise strong objections. One criticism says that archetypes are simply cultural stereotypes. They argue that labeling a coach as a hero or a parent as a mother reinforces old gender roles. If every coach is seen as a hero, then the pressure to be perfect may become harmful. If every parent is seen as a mother, then fathers may feel excluded from the nurturing role. This view holds that archetypes can limit people by forcing them into narrow boxes. A second criticism focuses on the lack of scientific proof. Skeptics note that Jung never provided a way to measure the collective unconscious. They say that the idea of a shared mind is too vague to test in a lab. They point out that similar stories can arise because societies trade ideas, not because of a hidden psychic store. From this perspective, archetypes are interesting patterns, but they are not evidence of a deep mind layer. Supporters of Jung respond to these criticisms by pointing to the durability of certain symbols across time and space. They note that the hero pattern appears in ancient Sumerian epics, in medieval romances, and in modern superhero movies. The mother figure shows up in ancient fertility rites, in Victorian poetry, and in contemporary parenting guides. The persistence of these patterns suggests something more than simple cultural exchange. To illustrate the power of archetypes, consider the story of a small town that needed a new school principal. The town council looked for someone who could inspire confidence and guide change. They chose a retired teacher who had once coached a local soccer team to a championship. The teacher's background as a coach fit the hero archetype. When the teacher arrived, teachers and parents felt a sense of hope. The teacher's actions matched the expectations of the hero role, and the school's performance improved. This example shows how an archetype can shape real outcomes. A second everyday example involves a child who loses a favorite toy. The child cries, and the grandparent steps in, offering a comforting hug and a story about a brave rabbit who found a lost carrot. The grandparent's role fits the mother archetype, even though the grandparent is not the child's mother. The child feels safe and learns that loss can be faced with care. The archetype helps the grandparent know how to act, and the child receives the comfort needed. Analogies can help make the concept clearer. Think of archetypes as the basic shapes of a puzzle. Each piece has a distinct outline, a corner piece, an edge piece, a middle piece. When the puzzle is built, the pieces fit together to form a picture. In the mind, archetypes are the outlines that help experiences fit together. When a new event occurs, The mind looks for the closest outline and places the event into that shape. This process makes sense of the world quickly. Another analogy compares archetypes to a set of familiar songs. When a musician hears a new melody, they may notice that it uses the same chord progression as many old songs. The chord progression is like an archetype, a pattern that repeats across many pieces of music. The listener feels something familiar because the pattern taps into a shared sense of what sounds good. In the same way, stories that use the hero, mother, or trickster patterns feel familiar because they echo deep mental patterns. Jung's own words help keep the idea grounded. He wrote, "Archetypes are the psychic counterpart of instinct." He meant that just as animals have built-in urges to eat or flee, humans have built-in images that guide how they see the world. He also said, "The mandala is the symbol of the self, the central point that holds the whole." By pointing to the mandala, Jung gave a concrete picture of an archetype that many people can recognize. The influence of Jung's archetypes can be seen in modern film theory. Critics often talk about the hero's journey as a template for movies. This template includes stages such as the call to adventure, the road of trials, the ultimate test, and the return. Each stage matches an archetypal pattern that the audience can sense even without knowing the terms. When a film follows this pattern, viewers often feel a deep satisfaction because the story fits an ancient mental shape. In the field of branding, companies use archetypes to shape their identity. A brand that wants to be seen as adventurous may adopt the explorer archetype. A brand that wants to be trusted may use the caregiver archetype, which is similar to the mother pattern. By using these images, the brand taps into the collective unconscious and creates an instant connection with customers. Even in politics, leaders sometimes present themselves as the hero who will rescue the nation from danger. When a leader speaks of a whole great battle against an enemy, the language activates the hero archetype in the audience's mind. People may then be more willing to follow the leader, because the story fits a familiar pattern of good versus evil. The counterargument that archetypes are cultural stereotypes can be examined through the lens of gender. The hero is often portrayed as male, and the mother as female. Critics argue that this reinforces a narrow view of what men and women can do. However, Jung noted that archetypes are not tied to any one gender. The hero can be a woman, as in the story of Mulan, and the mother can be a man, as in the story of a father who cares for his sick child. The archetype is about the role, not the gender of the person who fills it. The second counterargument about scientific proof can be addressed by looking at modern research in cognitive science. Studies on pattern recognition show that the brain is wired to notice recurring shapes and narratives. When people hear a story that matches an archetype, brain scans reveal activation in areas linked to emotion and memory. While this does not prove a collective unconscious, it does suggest that certain patterns have a special status in the mind. In recent years, some scholars have combined Jung's ideas with evolutionary psychology. They argue that archetypes may have helped early humans survive. A hero figure could inspire cooperation in hunting or defense. A mother figure could reinforce care for the young. Over many generations, these patterns became hard-wired in the brain. This view offers a bridge between Jung's symbolic language and modern science. The practical side of archetypes can be seen in therapy sessions. A therapist may ask a client to draw a picture of a guide who helps them through a problem. The client often creates an image that resembles the mentor archetype, an older, wise figure. By discussing this image, the therapist helps the client understand the inner resources they already have. The archetype becomes a tool for personal growth. In education, teachers can use archetypes to help students grasp complex ideas. When teaching about the water cycle, a teacher might describe the sun as the hero that drives the journey of water. The earth can be seen as the mother that collects and returns the water. By framing the lesson in familiar roles, students find the material easier to remember. The mandala story from Jung's own life illustrates how an archetype can appear in a personal vision. Jung described a dream in which he saw a perfect circle divided into 4 equal parts, each filled with a different color. He felt a deep sense of calm and completeness. He wrote that the mandala represented the self, the whole personality. He later used mandala drawings as a way for patients to explore their inner world. The mandala became a symbol that many people around the world now use in meditation and art, showing how an archetype can spread far beyond its origin. Jung's work with Native American myths also shows the power of archetypes across cultures. He collected a story about a trickster who stole fire. Sorry, but I can provide that. The night is a quiet room, and the mind is a soft radio that turns on when the lights go out. In Carl Jung's view, the broadcast that comes through the static is not random noise. It is a message from the unconscious, a part of the mind that lies beneath everyday awareness. Jung called this part the collective unconscious, a deep layer that holds symbols shared by all people. He believed that dreams are the language of that layer, a language that speaks in images, feelings, and stories instead of words. When a dream arrives, it is like a puzzle with missing pieces. The picture is there, but some parts are hidden, some are out of place. The mind tries to fit the pieces together, and the dreamer wakes with a sense that something is unfinished. Jung taught that the missing pieces are clues. By studying the symbols that appear, a person can learn what the unconscious is trying to say. One of the most common symbols is the loss of teeth. Many people remember a night when they woke up feeling a tooth falling out in the dream. In Jung's language, teeth are a symbol of power, confidence, and the ability to bite into life. When they fall, the unconscious may be pointing to a fear of losing control or a feeling of vulnerability. The dream does not give a direct answer, but it offers a feeling that can be explored. A therapist might ask, "What in your waking life feels like a loss of strength?" The answer can lead to a deeper understanding of the issue. Another everyday example is the dream of flying. A person may find themselves soaring above a city, feeling light and free. Jung saw flying as a symbol of the desire to rise above ordinary limits, to reach a higher perspective, or to escape from something that feels heavy. The feeling of wind on the face, the view of the ground far below, all carry emotional weight. By looking at what the dreamer feels while flying, the therapist can see whether the dream points to hope, ambition, or perhaps a need to leave a stressful situation. Jung did not think that these symbols were random. He argued that they are part of a larger system of meaning that the unconscious uses to keep the psyche balanced. He wrote, "The dream is a small hidden door that leads to the inner world." In his own words, the unconscious is not a chaos, but a structured whole that seeks expression. For Jung, the mind is a self-regulating system, much like a thermostat that tries to keep the inner temperature stable. Dreams are the signals that tell the system when something is out of balance. To illustrate how the unconscious works, Jung kept a personal dream journal. In 1907, while still a medical student, he recorded a vivid dream about a scarab beetle shining in golden light. He wrote, "I saw a great beetle of gold, its wings spread, and a feeling of awe rose in me." This image stayed with him for years. He later realized that the beetle represented transformation, a symbol that appears in many cultures as a sign of rebirth. The scarab became a key to understanding his own inner changes during that period of study and self-questioning. Jung's method was not limited to his own dreams. He worked with many patients, and one case stands out for its clear symbol. A woman came to him with recurring dreams of a mandala, a circular design with a central point and radiating patterns. Jung wrote in his notes, "The mandala appears as a symbol of wholeness, a map of the inner world." He asked the patient to draw the mandala, and together they explored what each part meant to her. The mandala helped the patient see that she was seeking integration of different parts of herself, her work life, her family, her hidden desires. The symbol acted as a guide, showing a path toward balance. Not everyone agrees with Jung's view. Some scientists argue that dreams are just random brain activity. One argument, often called the activation synthesis model, says that during sleep the brain stem sends random signals to the cortex. The cortex then tries to make sense of these signals, creating a story that we remember as a dream. In this view, symbols are not messages but byproducts of the brain trying to stitch together noise. The argument is simple. The brain fires, the mind narrates, and the result is a dream that has no deeper meaning. A second counter-argument comes from cognitive psychologists who see dreams as a form of memory consolidation. They claim that the brain simply replays recent experiences to strengthen memory traces. The images that appear are fragments of daily life, mixed together in a way that looks symbolic, but is actually just a rehearsal of what the brain has learned. According to this view, a dream about teeth falling out might be the brain's way of rehearsing a recent dental appointment, while a flying dream could be the brain's replay of a movie scene or a video game. The symbols, then, are not messages from a hidden layer, but random pieces of everyday input. Jung responded to these kinds of critiques by pointing out that the same symbol can appear across cultures and centuries, far beyond the reach of personal experience. He noted that the mandala, the scarab, the hero's journey all show up in myths, art, and dreams worldwide. He wrote, "When the same image arises in many minds, it cannot be a mere accident." For Jung, the shared symbols are evidence that the unconscious holds a collective memory, a deep well of images that all humans draw from. In practice, Jung's ideas about symbols and dreams have found many uses. Therapists often ask clients to keep a dream journal, writing down every image they recall upon waking. The journal becomes a map of the inner world, a place where patterns can be seen. A therapist might notice that a client repeatedly dreams of water. Water, in Jungian language, often stands for the unconscious itself, for emotions, for the flow of life. By exploring the feelings attached to the water, whether it is calm, stormy, clear, or murky, the client can learn about their emotional state. Another practical use is in creative work. Artists, writers, and musicians sometimes turn to their dreams for inspiration. When a painter recalls a dream of a bright red door opening onto a desert, that image can become the seed of a painting that explores themes of transition and isolation. The dream supplies a symbol that already carries emotional weight, saving the creator the need to invent a new metaphor from scratch. Jung believed that this process shows how the unconscious can help the conscious mind solve problems by offering images that act like clues. Modern interpretations of Jung's dream theory have blended his ideas with new scientific findings. Some researchers use brain imaging to study what happens when people recall a dream. They have found that areas linked to emotion and memory light up, supporting Jung's claim that dreams are tied to deep feelings. Others have combined Jung's archetype theory, the idea that certain symbols are universal, with modern anthropology, showing how similar symbols appear in distant societies. This work keeps the conversation alive, showing that Jung's view still offers a useful lens. To bring the ideas home, imagine a simple scene. A teenager wakes up after a night of tossing and turning. He remembers a dream where he was climbing a tall ladder that seemed to stretch into the clouds. He feels a mix of fear and excitement. In Jungian terms, the ladder can be seen as a symbol of personal growth, a step-by-step path toward higher goals. The clouds may represent the unknown future. By thinking about what the ladder feels like, whether it is sturdy or wobbly, the teen can learn how he feels about his own progress in school, sports, or relationships. The dream gives him a picture of his inner state without him having to spell it out in words. Consider another everyday moment. A woman wakes after dreaming that she is late for an important meeting. She feels a rush of panic. The dream's symbol, being late, can point to a deeper anxiety about being judged or not meeting expectations. Jung would ask her to notice the feeling of panic, then ask what in her waking life makes her feel judged. The symbol helps her see a hidden fear, allowing her to address it directly, perhaps by planning better or by talking about her worries with a friend. Jung's own words help keep the picture clear. He once wrote, "The dream is the small hidden door that leads to the inner world." He also said, "The symbol is a living thing that can change its shape as it moves through the mind." These statements remind listeners that dreams are not static pictures, but living messages that can grow and shift as a person works with them. The nighttime radio broadcast analogy can be used again. When a song plays on the radio, the listener may not know the artist, but the melody can stir a feeling. The same happens with dreams. The unconscious sends a broadcast, and the mind receives a melody of images. The listener can tune in, notice the tune, and perhaps find a new song that matches their mood. In the same way, a dream can lead a person to a new understanding of themselves. The puzzle analogy also returns. When a piece is missing, the picture feels incomplete. A therapist helps the dreamer find the missing piece by asking simple questions. What does this image remind you of? How did you feel when you saw it? By filling in the gaps, the whole picture becomes clearer. The process is gentle, like fitting a small square into a larger shape, and each new piece adds confidence. In the end, Jung's view of dreams as messages from the unconscious offers a way to listen to the inner voice that often hides behind daily noise. Whether the dream shows teeth falling out, a flight through clouds, a golden scarab, or a mandala, each symbol carries a hint of what the mind needs to balance. The counterarguments remind that not all scientists accept this view, pointing to random brain activity and memory rehearsal. Yet the persistence of similar symbols across cultures, the personal insights that arise from working with dreams, and the ongoing research that links emotion and memory to dreaming all keep Jung's ideas alive. For anyone who wishes to explore their own nighttime broadcast, the first step is simple. Keep a notebook by the bed, write down every image upon waking, and look for patterns. Over time, the notebook becomes a map, the puzzle fills in, and the symbols turn from mysterious pictures into useful guides. In this calm, reflective work, the unconscious does not remain a hidden, chaotic force. Instead, it becomes a partner, offering clues that help the conscious mind find balance, meaning, and growth. The journey through symbols and dreams, then, is a gentle walk through the night, guided by the soft glow of inner light. Individuation is the word Carl Jung used for the journey toward a whole self. It is a process of turning a raw stone into a shining gem. The stone starts rough, with many edges. Through careful work, the edges are smoothed, the facets are cut, and light can enter. In the same way, a person starts with many parts that are hidden or unused. Over time, the hidden parts are brought into view, shaped, and linked together. The result is a self that feels complete. Jung described this work as a garden that is slowly trimmed. At first, the garden is wild. Weeds grow, vines tangle, and the paths are unclear. A gardener walks in, sees where the roses belong, pulls the weeds, and trims the hedges. Each cut makes the garden easier to walk through. The garden does not lose its wild beauty, but it gains a shape that lets the gardener enjoy it more. Individuation works like that garden. The mind contains wild thoughts, old memories, and strong feelings. By looking inside, by naming the parts, by accepting them, the inner garden becomes easier to move through. A second image Jung used was a song that finally finds its chorus. A song can start with a simple melody. The verses may wander, the rhythm may shift, and the words may feel unfinished. When the chorus arrives, the song feels whole. The chorus ties the verses together and gives the listener a sense of purpose. In the same way, individuation brings a chorus to the many verses of a life. The chorus is the sense that all parts belong together. To see how this works in everyday life, imagine a person who has always been told that a scar on the hand is a flaw. The scar makes the person feel shy, as if it shows imperfection. Over many months, the person begins to look at the scar not as a mistake, but as a sign of a story. The scar tells of a childhood fall, of a time when the person learned to get up again. By accepting the scar, the person lets it become part of the self. The scar no longer hides, but shines as a mark of growth. This small change is a step of individuation. The person moves from denial to acceptance, and the self feels a little more whole. A second example is the choice of a career that matches inner values. Many people work in jobs that pay the bills but do not speak to the heart. They may feel a quiet pull toward art, teaching, or caring for others. When the pull becomes strong enough, the person may study, practice, and eventually move into a field that feels right. The new work does not erase the old skills. It adds a layer that fits the inner sense of purpose. The shift is not instant. It takes reflection, trial, and sometimes fear. Yet, as the person steps into the new role, a sense of alignment appears. The career becomes a mirror of the inner values, and the self feels more integrated. Jung did not present individuation as a quick fix. He saw it as a lifelong path. He wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." The quote reminds that the work is inward, not outward. The awakening comes when the hidden parts are brought into light. Jung also said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The privilege is not a gift that arrives fully formed. It is earned through the slow work of individuation. The idea of becoming whole has attracted many supporters, but it has also faced criticism. One common counterargument says that the goal is vague. Critics ask, what does it mean to be whole? How can one measure it? They claim that without a clear target, the concept can drift into fantasy. Jung answered this by pointing to the concrete steps of the process: dreaming, active imagination, and confronting the shadow. The shadow is the part of the mind that hides undesirable traits. By naming the shadow, a person makes the vague idea into a clear task. The critic's concern about vagueness is softened when the process is broken into observable actions. A second objection says that the search for a whole self is selfish. The argument goes, if each person focuses on their own wholeness, they may ignore the needs of others. The critique worries that individuation could become an excuse for egoism. Jung replied that true wholeness includes the recognition of the collective. He wrote, "The self is not only the center but also the circumference that embraces the whole of the psyche." In this view, becoming whole does not mean ignoring others. It means seeing how one's inner life fits into the larger human story. The self that is aware of its own depth can also act with compassion. Historical anecdotes help to see how Jung lived the idea. In his middle years, Jung faced a personal crisis that many call a midlife crisis. He felt that his early work on the unconscious had reached a limit. He described a night when he could not sleep and felt a deep emptiness. In that darkness, he turned to his own inner images, to dreams that spoke of a mandala, a circular symbol of wholeness. He painted the mandala and kept it as a reminder of the need to integrate the inner parts. This episode shows Jung applying individuation to his own life, using art and dream work to move toward a more complete self. Another story comes from Jung's therapy with a writer named Sabina Spear-Rain. Spielrein came to Jung after a nervous breakdown. She felt that her life was split between a desire to create and a fear of failure. Jung guided her through a series of dialogues, asking her to write down her dreams and to speak the feelings that rose up. Over weeks, Spielrein began to see a pattern, a longing for love that was hidden behind a fear of rejection. By naming that pattern, she could write stories that included both love and fear. The therapy helped her to accept the hidden part of herself, and she later wrote works that reflected a deeper, more integrated voice. The episode illustrates how individuation can turn personal pain into creative strength. Modern thinkers have taken Jung's idea and placed it in new settings. Some psychologists talk about self-actualization in a way that echoes individuation. They use the term to describe the point where a person uses their talents, values, and emotions in harmony. Others bring the concept into business, suggesting that employees who know their inner strengths work better in teams. In education, teachers who help students explore their inner stories may foster deeper learning. The core idea remains the same. A person grows when inner parts are recognized, accepted, and linked. Real-world applications appear in many places. A therapist may ask a client to keep a journal of dreams, then explore the symbols that show up. The therapist may point out that a recurring image of a locked door could represent a hidden fear. By talking about the lock, the client can work to open it. In a different setting, a coach may help an athlete ask, "What part of me feels afraid of failure?" The athlete may discover that a childhood memory of being scolded for a mistake still lives inside. By accepting that memory, the athlete can play with less fear. Both examples show the process of turning hidden material into conscious material, a key step of individuation. Analogies keep the concept clear. Think of a river that has many small streams feeding into it. Each stream brings its own water, its own color, its own temperature. When the streams join, the river becomes richer. If a stream is blocked, the river loses part of its flow. Individuation is like clearing the block, letting each stream flow into the main river. The river then moves forward with a stronger current. Another analogy is a puzzle. A puzzle starts with many pieces scattered on a table. Some pieces look similar, some are oddly shaped. When the picture is unknown, it is hard to know where each piece belongs. As the puzzle grows, the edges become visible, and the picture starts to make sense. The moment when the last piece clicks into place gives a feeling of completeness. Individuation is the act of finding where each piece of the self fits until the picture of the whole self appears. Jung's own words give a clear picture of the goal. He wrote, "The goal of individuation is the integration of the conscious with the unconscious." In plain terms, this means that what a person knows about themselves should match the deeper feelings that lie beneath the surface. When the two match, the person feels at peace with their thoughts and emotions. Jung also said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." The quote invites the listener to turn inward, to see the hidden parts that shape daily life. The process can be broken into steps that are easy to follow. First, a person pays attention to dreams, fantasies, and strong emotional reactions. Second, the person writes down what they notice without judging it. Third, the person looks for patterns, symbols, or recurring themes. Fourth, the person asks what each pattern might be trying to tell about a hidden part of the self. Fifth, the person works to accept that part, perhaps by talking about it, creating art, or practicing a new behavior. Each step is simple, yet together they form a path toward wholeness. Critics who say the goal is vague may point to the lack of a final destination. Jung answered by saying that the journey itself is the destination. He likened the self to a circle that never ends, always returning to the center. The center is the point of balance, not a final achievement. When a person feels that they have moved closer to the center, they notice more balance in daily life. The sense of balance is the evidence that the process works. Those who claim the goal is selfish may miss the relational aspect of individuation. Jung believed that the self contains both personal and collective elements. He wrote, "The individual is a microcosm of the whole human family. By working on the inner world, a person also learns how their story fits into the larger story of humanity. The result is a person who can act with empathy because they have seen the hidden parts of themselves and can recognize them in others." In practice, many people find that accepting a flaw can change how they act. A student who once hid a stutter may, after acknowledging it, speak more slowly and with confidence. The acceptance removes the fear of being judged, and the student can focus on the ideas they want to share. The change is small, but it reflects the larger pattern of turning a hidden part into a known part. Choosing a career that matches inner values also shows the power of individuation. A lawyer who loves nature may feel a pull toward environmental law. By listening to that pull, the lawyer may study new cases, volunteer with conservation groups, and eventually shift practice. The new work feels less like a job and more like a calling. The sense of purpose that arises is a sign that the outer life is aligning with the inner self. The garden analogy can be expanded. In a garden, some plants are native, some are imported. Some weeds are actually useful plants in disguise. When a gardener learns to recognize each plant's role, the garden becomes richer. Similarly, a person may find that a trait once seen as a flaw is actually a hidden talent. A tendency to be overly cautious may protect against danger, while also limiting risk-taking. By seeing both sides, the person can adjust the trait, using it when helpful and letting go when it blocks growth. The song analogy also deepens. A song may have a bridge that connects two verses. The bridge is often the most emotional part, where the singer reveals a hidden feeling. In individuation, the bridge is the moment when a person faces the shadow, the hidden side that holds fear or shame. When the bridge is crossed, the song reaches its chorus, and the listener feels resolution. The bridge may be uncomfortable, but it is necessary for the song to feel complete. Jung's therapy with Sabina Spielrein provides a concrete example of crossing the bridge. Spielrein's dreams often showed a dark forest. Jung asked her to imagine walking through the forest, noting the trees, the sounds, and the feeling of being watched. As she described the walk, she realized that the forest represented her fear of being unseen. By naming the fear, she could write stories where the main character entered a dark place and emerged with a new light. The therapy turned a hidden fear into a source of creative power. Jung's own midlife crisis shows the garden being trimmed from the inside. He wrote in his journal, "The old self is dying, and a new shape is forming." He felt that his early theories had become a cage. By turning to art, by painting mandalas, he opened a new path. The mandala, a circular design, became a map of his inner world. Each segment of the mandala represented a part of his psyche. By drawing the mandala, Jung gave shape to the parts that were previously vague. The act of drawing helped him. Carl Jung first spoke about the idea of psychological types in a series of lectures that began in the early 1910s. In those talks, he tried to map the way people take in information and the way they act on it. He called the two opposite attitudes introversion and extroversion. Introversion means that a person turns his or her attention inward toward thoughts, feelings, and memories. Extroversion means that a person turns attention outward toward people, objects, and activity. Jung said that every person has both sides, but one side is usually stronger, like a battery that charges more quickly on one side than the other. When the stronger side is used most of the time, the person feels most alive and at ease. Jung also described 4 basic functions that work with the 2 attitudes. The functions are thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Thinking is the way a person orders ideas with logic. Feeling is the way a person judges what is good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant. Sensation is the way a person notices facts through the senses. Intuition is the way a person sees patterns and possibilities beyond the immediate facts. Each function can be used in an introverted way or an extroverted way. This creates 8 possible type slots, such as introverted thinking or extroverted feeling. Jung wrote that a person usually has a dominant function, a secondary, auxiliary function, and 2 less developed functions that act in the background. A simple kitchen analogy helps to picture the 4 functions. Imagine a kitchen where the chef can cook in 4 different styles. Thinking is like using a precise recipe, measuring each ingredient carefully. Feeling is like cooking by taste, adjusting spices until the dish feels right. Sensation is like following a step-by-step instruction manual, trusting the exact steps. Intuition is like improvising a new dish, seeing how flavors might combine before they are even mixed. Each chef may favor one style most of the time, but can also use the other styles when needed. The chef's favorite style is the dominant function, while the second favorite is the auxiliary function. The other 2 styles are present, but not as strong. Jung's ideas did not stay in lecture halls for long. In the 1940s, 2 women, Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers, took Jung's theory and turned it into a questionnaire that could be given to many people. They called the result the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. The MBTI labels each type with a 4-letter code, such as NFP or ESTJ, based on the dominant attitude, introversion or extroversion, and the order of the 4 functions. The early adoption of Jung's ideas by the Myers-Briggs team is a key historical anecdote. Briggs and Myers met with Jung in 1935, and Jung gave them his permission to use his type theory for a practical test. He wrote, "Though the classification of types is a useful instrument for the study of the individual, provided it is not turned into a rigid rule." This quote shows that Jung saw his model as a guide, not a law. The battery analogy appears again when everyday life is examined. Think of a person who prefers quiet evenings at home. That person is likely using introverted feeling or introverted intuition as a dominant function. The quiet room lets the inner world recharge, just as a battery recharges when it is connected to the right charger. In contrast, a person who loves lively parties is often using extroverted sensing or extroverted thinking. The noise, the movement, and the social interaction act like a fast charger that fills the battery quickly. Both people are using the same type of energy, but the source and the speed differ. Another everyday example shows how the 4 functions can shape behavior. A teacher who loves to explain concepts step by step may be using extroverted sensing as a dominant function. The teacher focuses on concrete details, on what the students can see and touch. A writer who spends hours dreaming about future possibilities may be using introverted intuition. The writer looks beyond the present scene, seeing a story that has not yet taken shape. Both are using different functions, yet both can succeed in the same classroom, showing how the type model can explain diverse styles. Critics have raised concerns that the type model is too rigid. One argument says that labeling a person as an introvert or extrovert can lock them into a fixed box, ignoring the fluid way people change over time. The critic points out that many people act introverted at work but extroverted with friends, and that a strict type label does not capture this shift. A second counterargument says that the 8-type model does not account for the many shades of personality that exist between the poles. The critic quotes a modern psychologist. "Human behavior is a gradient, not a set of discrete steps." This view suggests that the type system oversimplifies a complex reality. Supporters respond by pointing to real-world applications where the type model helps people understand each other. In the workplace, managers often use MBTI results to build balanced teams. A team that mixes extroverted sensing people with introverted intuition people can combine quick action with long-range planning. In education, teachers use type ideas to offer different ways of learning. A student who prefers introverted thinking may thrive on independent problem-solving, while a student who prefers extroverted feeling may learn best through group discussion. These applications show that the model can be a useful map, even if it is not a perfect map. Modern interpretations of Jung's type theory have added new layers. Some researchers combine the type model with the Big Five personality traits, looking for overlaps. Others use neuroscience to study how brain activity differs when a person uses an introverted versus an extroverted function. Recent studies have found that introverted people often show higher activity in brain regions linked to internal thought, while extroverted people show higher activity in areas linked to social processing. These findings give a scientific flavor to Jung's original ideas, showing that the concepts still inspire research. A second historical anecdote illustrates how Jung's lecture series on types spread beyond Europe. In 1921, Jung gave a series of public talks in Zurich that were later published as Psychological Types. The book reached an English-speaking audience when it was translated in the 1930s. A group of American psychologists reading the translation decided to test the ideas in a corporate setting. They gave a short questionnaire to employees at a large manufacturing plant, and the results sparked a debate about how to place people in roles that matched their type. This early experiment helped pave the way for the later development of the MBTI questionnaire. Jung's own words give a clear picture of his thinking. He wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two magnets. They either attract or repel according to their orientation." This quote explains that people who share similar dominant functions tend to feel comfortable together, while those with opposite functions may experience tension. Another famous line from Jung reads, "What we do not accept, we cannot change." This sentence reminds the listener that recognizing one's own type is the first step toward personal growth. The battery analogy can be expanded further. Imagine two phones. One has a lithium-ion battery that charges quickly but loses capacity over time if overcharged. The other has a slower, steadier nickel-metal battery that lasts longer but takes more time to charge. A person who relies heavily on extroverted sensing may charge quickly in social settings, gaining energy fast, but may also burn out if they do not rest. A person who relies on introverted intuition may charge slowly, needing quiet reflection to build energy, but may have a steadier reserve that lasts through long projects. Both charging styles are valid. Each just fits a different lifestyle. The kitchen analogy can also show how the auxiliary function works. A chef who primarily cooks by taste, feeling, may still need a recipe thinking to keep a dish balanced. The secondary function supports the main style, preventing the chef from over-relying on one approach. In a personality context, a person whose dominant function is extroverted thinking may still use introverted feeling to check whether a decision aligns with personal values. This balance helps avoid extreme behavior. Real-world stories illustrate the usefulness of the type model. A police officer who prefers extroverted sensing may excel in fast-moving situations, noticing details in a chaotic scene. A detective who leans toward introverted intuition may excel at seeing hidden patterns in evidence, solving cold cases. Both types bring essential skills to the same department, showing how diverse functions can complement each other. In education, a high school student who enjoys quiet evenings reading novels often shows a preference for introverted feeling. This student finds meaning in personal values and inner emotions, and the quiet time allows the inner world to develop. Another student who thrives at lively school dances, meeting many new people, demonstrates a preference for extroverted feeling. This student gains energy from social interaction and enjoys expressing emotions outwardly. Both students can succeed academically. They simply need different study environments. Critics who claim the model is too rigid also point to the fact that many people score in the middle of the introversion-extroversion scale. They argue that forcing a binary label ignores the many people who sit in the middle. In response, supporters note that Jung himself described introversion and extroversion as a spectrum, not an absolute switch. Jung wrote, "The attitude of introversion is not an absolute withdrawal from the outer world, but a turning inward of the mind." This statement clarifies that the model allows for mixed use of both attitudes. Another objection is that the four functions are culturally biased. Some scholars argue that societies that value group harmony may push people toward extroverted feeling, while societies that value individual achievement may push people toward introverted thinking. The criticism suggests that the type model reflects cultural expectations more than innate preferences. In reply, modern researchers point to cross-cultural studies that find similar patterns of function used across many societies, indicating that the basic structure may be universal, even if expression varies. The modern MBTI instrument has been refined many times. The original questionnaire had a few hundred questions. Today it often has around 90 items. The scoring system has been updated to improve reliability, meaning that a person taking the test multiple times is more likely to receive the same type each time. While the test is not perfect, many organizations still find it useful for team building, career counseling, and personal development. In recent years, digital tools have added a new twist. Online platforms now offer quick type assessments that give instant feedback. Some apps let users track their mood and see how their dominant function shows up in daily life. For example, an app may ask a user to rate how energized they feel after a social event versus after a solo activity. Over time, the data can reveal whether the person leans toward extroversion or introversion, confirming the earlier lecture-based ideas with personal data. Jung's influence reaches beyond psychology into literature and art. Writers such as Hermann Hesse and poets like Rainer Maria Rilke explored the tension between inner and outer worlds, echoing Jung's introversion-extroversion theme. In visual art, painters who focus on detailed realism may be expressing a sensation function, while abstract artists may be channeling intuition. These artistic choices illustrate how the type model can describe creative styles as well as everyday behavior. A final modern interpretation comes from the field of leadership coaching. Coaches often use type language to help leaders understand how they make decisions and how they motivate teams. A leader with dominant extroverted thinking may excel at setting clear goals and measuring progress. A leader with dominant introverted feeling may excel at building a shared sense of purpose and caring for team members. By recognizing these patterns, coaches can suggest strategies that fit each leader's natural style, while also encouraging growth in the less used functions. The story of Jung's psychological types began in a small lecture hall in Zurich, grew through a transatlantic partnership with the Briggs-Myers team, and now lives on in classrooms, boardrooms, and personal journals. The core idea remains simple. People differ in where they direct their attention and how they process information, like a battery that charges in different ways or a kitchen where chefs choose different cooking styles each. Carl Jung began his study of myth and religion at a time when psychology was still trying to find its own voice. He grew up in a family that valued both science and faith, and he saw early on that the stories people tell about gods and heroes often speak about the same inner feelings that patients describe in therapy. Jung called this inner world the soul, a word that he used to mean the part of a person that holds deep images, feelings, and urges that are not always easy to see. He believed that myths and religions act like a map that guides travelers across a dark forest. The map does not show every tree, but it points out the safe paths and the hidden dangers. In the same way, a myth can point a person toward a hidden part of themselves, a part that may be needed for growth. The idea that myths are more than stories dates back to ancient thinkers. The Greeks spoke of the psyche as a hidden fire inside each person. Later, the German philosopher Friedrich Schleiermacher wrote that religious feeling is a sense of the infinite that lives inside the heart. Jung took these older thoughts and added his own observation that the symbols found in myths repeat across cultures. He called this repeat pattern the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is like a deep well that all humans share, and the water in the well is made of images that appear in dreams, art, and rituals. Jung wrote, "The unconscious is not just personal. It is also a common reservoir of images that belong to the whole of humanity." This quote shows how he linked the inner life to the outer stories that cultures create. Jung's argument rests on three main points. First, myths contain symbols that represent inner forces. A symbol is a picture that stands for something deeper, like a rose standing for love. Second, religions use rituals to bring those symbols to life. A ritual is a repeated action that helps a person feel connected to something larger than themselves. Third, the soul grows when a person can see the link between the symbol and the feeling it hides. When a person looks at a myth and feels a sudden sense of awe, the myth has opened a door to the inner world. To show how this works, Jung gave the example of a sunrise. When the sun lifts over the horizon, many people feel a sudden rush of wonder. That feeling is not just about light. It is a sign that the inner self is waking up to something new. The sunrise acts like a mirror that shows a hidden face. The mirror does not change the face. It simply reflects it so the person can see it. In the same way, a myth can reflect a hidden part of the soul, allowing the person to recognize it. Another everyday example is the comfort found in a simple ritual, such as lighting a candle on a birthday. The act of lighting the candle does not itself solve any problem, but the ritual creates a safe space where the person can feel a sense of order and meaning. The ritual is like a map that points the traveler toward a calm place inside. Jung's study of the Red Book provides a vivid historical anecdote of how he used myth and symbol to explore his own soul. In 1913, after a period of personal crisis, Jung began to write and paint in a private journal that he later called the Red Book. He filled the pages with images of dragons, mandalas, and ancient gods. He wrote, "Why have entered a strange land, a land of symbols, where the inner world is as vivid as the outer world." By confronting the images that rose up in his mind, Jung believed he was walking a map of his own unconscious. The Red Book became a key piece of evidence for his claim that mythic images are not just cultural artifacts, but living parts of the psyche. A second historical anecdote comes from Jung's analysis of Christian symbols in art. While traveling in Europe, Jung spent many hours in cathedrals looking at stained glass windows that showed stories of saints and the crucifixion. He wrote in a letter, "The cross is not merely a wooden beam. It is a symbol that carries the weight of suffering, hope, and rebirth for every soul that looks at it." Jung argued that the repeated appearance of the cross in churches acted as a map for believers, guiding them through feelings of loss and renewal. He saw the same pattern in other religious art, such as the mandala designs in Buddhist temples, which he described as circles that hold the whole world inside a single shape. These observations supported his claim that symbols in religion act as mirrors that reflect the inner life of anyone who looks at them. Not everyone agreed with Jung's view. One common counterargument claims that Jung over-interpreted symbols, seeing deep meaning where there is none. Critics point out that many symbols are simply cultural decorations that do not carry any universal psychological weight. They argue that a dragon in a medieval story may just be a monster meant to frighten children, not a sign of an inner fear of the unknown. Another counterargument comes from modern cognitive scientists who say that the brain builds meaning through patterns, not through a shared unconscious. They suggest that similar symbols appear in different cultures because humans face similar problems, not because they share a deep inner well. These critics say that Jung's map is too broad and that his mirror reflects more of his own ideas than the true inner life of others. Jung responded to such criticism by emphasizing the practical results of his method. He noted that patients who worked with mythic images often reported feeling more whole. A woman who dreamed of a wounded bird, for example, began to see the bird as a symbol of her own hurt feelings. By caring for the bird in her imagination, she learned to care for herself, Jung wrote. When the patient meets the image meets the patient, and a dialogue begins. This dialogue, he believed, is the proof that symbols do more than decorate stories. They open a channel between the inner and outer worlds. In modern times, Jung's ideas about myth and religion have found new life in fields such as psychotherapy, literature, and even video games. Therapists today sometimes ask clients to draw a picture of a personal myth or to write a short story that includes a symbol that feels important. By doing so, they help the client see a map of their inner landscape. In literature, authors often embed mythic patterns into their plots, allowing readers to feel a deep connection to the characters. In video games, designers create quests that follow the hero's journey, a pattern first described by Joseph Campbell, a scholar who was heavily influenced by Jung. The hero's journey is a storyline that moves from a call to adventure through trials to a return home with new wisdom. Players who follow this line often report a feeling of personal growth, as if they have walked a map that leads to a hidden part of themselves. Real-world applications of Jung's view can be seen in community rituals. In many cultures, people gather to mark the change of seasons with festivals that involve fire, dance, and shared meals. These events act as a collective mirror, showing each participant a shared face of hope and fear. When a community lights a bonfire at the winter solstice, the fire is not just a source of heat. It is a symbol of the inner light that each person carries. The shared act helps people feel that they are part of a larger story, reducing loneliness and anxiety. Similarly, modern mindfulness practices often borrow from religious rituals, using simple repeated actions like breathing or chanting. These practices serve as maps that guide the mind back to a calm center, showing the inner self in a clear way. Modern scholars have taken Jung's basic ideas and added new layers. Some argue that the collective unconscious can be understood as a set of archetypes, which are basic patterns of behavior and thought. Archetypes are like templates that shape how people see the world. The mother archetype, for instance, represents nurturing and protection, and appears in myths from Egyptian goddesses to modern movies about caring robots. Others suggest that cultural evolution can explain why certain symbols repeat, but they still accept Jung's claim that these symbols can act as mirrors for the inner life. A contemporary writer, James Hillman, built on Jung's work and called the study of the soul archetypal psychology. Hillman said, "The soul is not a hidden thing. It is a living story that we all tell." This view keeps the map and mirror analogies alive in today's conversations. To illustrate how a myth can work as a map, imagine a traveler who is lost in a dense forest at night. The traveler sees a faint glow from a lantern hanging on a tree. The lantern does not tell the traveler exactly where the road is, but it shows that someone has been there before and that a path may exist. The traveler follows the light, feeling a mix of hope and fear. In the same way, a myth can give a person a faint glow of meaning that points toward a hidden feeling. The person may not know the exact answer, but the myth offers a direction. To illustrate how a ritual can act as a mirror, think of a child looking into a calm pond. The child sees their own face reflected, but also sees ripples that move with the wind. The pond shows both the child's still self and the changing moods around them. A ritual works the same way. It reflects a person's inner state while also showing how that state changes with each repetition. When a person lights a candle each night, the steady flame mirrors their own steady breath, and the small changes in the flame's flicker remind them that feelings shift over time. Jung's own words often read like a gentle guide. He wrote, "The symbols that appear in the inner world are the language of the soul." He also said, "When a myth is taken up by a person, it becomes a living part of that person's inner life." These quotes capture the core of his belief that myths and religions are not just old stories, but active tools that help people map their inner world and see hidden faces of themselves. Critics who claim Jung over-interpreted symbols often point to cases where a symbol seems to have multiple, even contradictory meanings. For example, the serpent appears in many myths as a symbol of danger, but also as a symbol of wisdom. Some say Jung forced a single meaning onto the serpent, ignoring the cultural context. Another critique comes from the field of semiotics, which studies signs. Semiotic scholars argue that a sign only has meaning because of the specific culture that uses it, not because of a universal unconscious. They say Jung's map is too universal and does not respect the local details that give a symbol its true shape. Jung answered these critiques by noting that a symbol can hold many layers at once. He used the term complex to describe a group of feelings that stick together around a symbol. A complex can have both positive and negative sides, just as a river can be calm in some places and rapid in others. He wrote, "The symbol is never a single thing. It is a field that holds many shades. This view allows a single image like the serpent to be both a warning and a promise, depending on how the person looks at it." The influence of Jung's ideas can be traced to modern therapy methods such as narrative therapy and art therapy. In narrative therapy, a client is asked to tell the story of their life as if it were a myth, identifying the heroes, villains, and quests. By doing this, the client creates a map that shows where they have been and where they might go. In art therapy, a person may paint a scene that includes a familiar symbol, such as a tree. The tree can act as a mirror that shows how the person feels rooted or how they feel they are growing. Therapists often quote Jung when they explain why these methods work. The image is a doorway that lets the soul speak. Even in education, teachers sometimes use myths to help students understand complex ideas. A teacher might tell the story of Perseus and Medusa to talk about facing fear. The story becomes a map that guides students on how to confront their own anxieties. The teacher may also ask students to write about a personal ritual, such as a bedtime routine, and reflect on how that ritual mirrors their inner need for safety. These classroom activities show that Carl Jung's ideas have left a deep mark on many fields, but they have also drawn strong criticism. Some critics say his work lacks scientific proof, while others argue that his theories ignore the lived experience of women. To understand the debate, it helps to picture Jung's system as a building that was built many years ago. The walls are strong, the rooms are full of interesting rooms, but some cracks have appeared over time. A repair crew must check each wall, replace weak bricks, and add new insulation. In the same way, scholars look at Jung's ideas, test the parts that can be measured, and try to fix the parts that seem vague. Another picture is a garden that was planted with many different seeds. Some seeds grew into tall trees, some into bright flowers, and some never sprouted. Over the years, a gardener may need to pull weeds, add fresh soil, and sometimes replant sections that did not thrive. Jung's concepts of archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation are like those original seeds. They have produced many beautiful insights, yet they also need fresh care and new soil to stay healthy in today's world. One everyday example of how Jung's ideas are still used is a therapist who works with a client who feels stuck in a pattern of self-sabotage. The therapist may notice that the client repeatedly dreams about a dark forest. Using Jungian language, the therapist calls this forest an image that lives in the client's unconscious mind. The therapist helps the client explore what the forest could mean, perhaps linking it to a fear of the unknown. By talking about the image, the client can see a part of themselves that was hidden, and slowly the pattern begins to change. This approach shows how Jung's focus on symbols can become a practical tool in a counseling room. A second everyday example comes from a writer who is drafting a fantasy novel. The writer decides to give the hero a poor-wise old mentor and a trickster sidekick. These characters match two of Jung's classic archetypes, the sage and the trickster. By using these patterns, the writer can tap into deep feelings that many readers share. The story feels familiar, yet fresh, because the writer mixes the old patterns with new details. The writer's success shows how Jung's archetype map can help shape modern storytelling. Scientific critics often point to the lack of empirical data supporting the collective unconscious. They argue that the idea of a shared pool of images that all humans inherit cannot be measured with current tools. In a laboratory, researchers can track brain activity, test memory recall, and run statistical analyses, but they cannot point to a single spot in the brain that holds archetypal images. Because of this, many scientists label Jung's theory as untestable and therefore not scientific. They compare his ideas to a story that cannot be proved true or false, much like a myth that lives only in the imagination. Feminist scholars add another layer of critique. They say Jung's early writings often describe women in terms of the Anima, a female aspect that exists inside every man. Some feminists argue that this view reduces women to a mirror for male development, rather than seeing women as independent subjects. They also note that Jung's descriptions of the Great Mother archetype sometimes echo old, patriarchal ideas about women as nurturing, but also as dangerous. Because of this, many feminist thinkers feel that Jung's framework does not fully respect the diversity of women's experiences. Despite these criticisms, there are strong defenses of Jung's relevance today. One counterargument says that Jung's work is not meant to be a strict scientific theory, but rather a map for inner experience. Just as a city map helps a traveler find streets, parks, and landmarks, Jung's symbols help a person locate feelings, dreams, and motivations. The map does not need to be measured in centimeters to be useful. It only needs to guide the traveler. In this view, the value of Jung's ideas lies in their ability to give language to what many people feel but cannot easily describe. A second counterargument points to recent findings in neuroscience that echo Jung's ideas about the mind's deeper layers. Studies of the brain's default mode network, a set of regions that become active when a person is not focused on the outside world, show patterns that resemble the flow of images in dreams. Researchers have observed that during sleep, the brain replays fragments of memory in ways that look like symbolic storytelling. This resonates with Jung's claim that the unconscious communicates through symbols and images. While the brain studies do not prove Jung's exact terms, they suggest that the mind does have a level that works with images rather than strict logic. A historical anecdote from the 1950s helps illustrate how Jung's ideas spread beyond the academic world. After World War II, many people felt a deep sense of loss and searched for meaning. In 1950, A group of American psychologists traveled to Zurich to study with Jung at his institute. They returned home and opened the first C.G. Jung Institute in New York in 1955. The institute offered courses, lectures, and training for therapists who wanted to use Jungian methods. This Jungian revival created a community that kept his ideas alive, even as other psychological schools grew larger. The revival also attracted artists, writers, and spiritual seekers, turning Jung's theories into a cultural movement as well as a clinical tool. A more recent anecdote shows how modern science sometimes finds echoes of Jung's thoughts. In 2021, a team of neuroscientists published a study that linked the brain's activity during deep meditation to patterns that match Jung's description of the transcendent function. Jung described this function as the mind's ability to bring together opposite feelings, such as love and fear, into a new, balanced state. The researchers measured brain waves of experienced meditators and found that the brain shifted into a rhythm that combined activity from both the emotional and the rational centers. The scientists wrote that the result mirrors the integration of opposites that Jung described. This study does not prove Jung's whole theory, but it shows that some of his language can be useful when scientists try to describe complex mental states. Another quote from Jung himself helps keep the discussion grounded. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This line captures the heart of his idea of individuation, the process of growing into one's full self. A therapist who uses Jungian ideas may repeat this line to remind a client that the goal of therapy is not just to fix problems, but to help the person discover a deeper sense of purpose. The quote also shows why many people still feel drawn to Jung's work, even when critics point out its flaws. A second primary source quote comes from Jung's 1933 essay, The Structure of the Unconscious. He said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart." This simple statement invites readers to turn inward and examine the images that arise spontaneously. It also explains why Jung placed such importance on dreams, myths, and art. By encouraging people to look inside, Jung gave a tool that many find helpful, especially when modern life feels rushed and shallow. In practice, a therapist may ask a client to keep a dream journal. The client writes down each dream, no matter how odd. Over weeks, the therapist and client look for patterns. Perhaps the client repeatedly dreams of a locked door. The therapist may suggest that the door represents a part of the client's life that feels closed off. By exploring the feeling behind the door, the client can decide whether to try opening it or to accept that some doors remain shut. This process reflects Jung's belief that symbols in dreams point to hidden parts of the psyche. Even if science cannot measure the symbol directly, the method can still bring change in a person's life. A writer may use a similar technique when planning a story. The writer might ask, "What ancient story does my plot echo?" If the writer discovers that the hero's journey mirrors the myth of Perseus, the writer can add elements that speak to that old pattern, such as a dangerous sea monster or a shining shield. The story then taps into a deep reservoir of meaning that many readers recognize without being told. This is the power of archetypes. They act like a shared cultural language that can be spoken in many different ways. Critics who focus on the lack of data often bring up the example of the mandala, a circular symbol Jung used to represent the self. They argue that there is no way to test whether people who draw mandalas are actually moving towards self-integration. In response, supporters point out that the act of drawing a mandala can be a calming ritual that helps a person focus attention inward. Even if the effect cannot be measured with a ruler, the experience can still be valuable. This mirrors the earlier building analogy. A repair crew may not have a perfect blueprint, but they can still replace broken beams and make the building safer. Another feminist critique highlights Jung's early essay on the psychology of the feminine. The essay describes women as naturally drawn to the great mother archetype, which can be read as limiting. Feminist scholars argue that such statements reinforce stereotypes. In defense, some modern Jungian scholars have reinterpreted the Great Mother not as a gendered role, but as a symbol of nurturing energy that any person can draw on. They argue that the original wording reflects the time in which Jung wrote, and that the core idea can be updated to fit today's more inclusive view of gender. The modern impact of Jung's thought can be seen in popular culture as well. Television shows often feature characters that fit archetypal patterns: the wise mentor, the shadow villain, the trickster friend. Viewers may not know the term archetype, but they feel a sense of familiarity when these roles appear. This shows that Jung's map of the human mind still influences how stories are told and received. In the field of psychology, Jung's ideas have blended with other approaches. For example, some therapists combine Jungian imagery work with cognitive behavioral techniques. They may use the image of a storm to represent anxiety, then teach the client how to anchor the storm with breathing exercises. This hybrid method respects the power of symbols while also using evidence-based tools. It demonstrates that Jung's concepts can be adapted rather than discarded. In education, teachers sometimes use Jung's typology of personality, known as the Myers-Briggs type indicator, to help students understand their own learning styles. Although the test has faced criticism for lack of scientific rigor, many schools still find it useful as a conversation starter. The test sorts people into categories like introvert or extrovert, based on Jung's original ideas about how energy is directed. Even if the categories are not perfect, they can help students think about why they prefer quiet study or group discussion. A third modern example comes from the field of marketing. Companies often design brands that embody archetypal images, such as the hero brand that promises to help customers overcome obstacles. By tapping into deep symbols, marketers hope to create a stronger emotional bond with consumers. This practice shows that Jung's language of archetypes has moved beyond therapy and literature into everyday business. The building analogy can be returned to here. The original structure of Jung's theory was built with bold ideas about the unconscious, symbols, and personal growth. Over the decades, cracks have appeared. Scientific doubts, gender concerns, and cultural shifts. Repair crews, scientists, feminists, modern therapists have come with new tools. They patch the walls with data, replace outdated bricks with inclusive language, and add fresh insulation in the form of neuroscience. The building may never be a perfect skyscraper, but it can still stand strong enough to shelter people who need a place to explore their inner lives. The garden analogy also fits the modern scene. The original seeds, archetypes, the collective unconscious, individuation, sprouted many beautiful plants. Some plants have wilted under harsh weather, such as the rise of strict positivist science that dismissed anything not measurable. Gardeners have pulled the weeds of untested claims. The voice of the narrator begins with a calm invitation to notice the quiet ways that ideas can slip into daily life. Jung once said that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and those symbols appear in the moments that most people call ordinary. The first practical step that the guide suggests is to keep a small notebook by the bedside. When the mind drifts into sleep and images rise, the hand should catch the words as fast as possible. The act of writing down a dream is like turning on a lamp in a dark room. The light does not change the shape of the room, but it lets the eye see what is already there. In this way, the notebook becomes a record of the inner language that the unconscious uses. A second habit is to watch for recurring symbols during the waking day. If a person keeps seeing a snake in a book, on a screen, or in a conversation, the pattern is not random. Jung called such patterns archetypal images, but the term can be explained as a picture that the mind repeats because it carries a deeper meaning. The guide asks the listener to pause each time a symbol repeats, to note the feeling that comes up, and to ask what part of life might be connected. This simple pause is like tuning a radio to a clearer station. When the dial is turned a little, static fades, and the music becomes easier to hear. In the same way, a small shift in attention can turn a vague feeling into a useful clue. The third tip is to set a regular time for reflection, just as a plant needs water at the same time each day. The guide suggests a 5-minute pause after lunch, or a brief walk after dinner to ask 3 questions. What did I notice today? What symbol showed up? How did it feel? The answers can be spoken aloud, written, or simply held in mind. The habit of watering the mind with these questions helps the inner garden grow stronger, and it makes the later work of understanding easier. Choosing a hobby that matches an inner pattern is a concrete way to apply Jung's ideas. Imagine a person who repeatedly dreams of a river flowing fast and feels both fear and excitement. The guide points out that water often stands for emotion and movement. If that person enjoys painting, they might try a style that uses flowing lines and blue tones, allowing the inner river to find a place on canvas. The hobby then becomes a safe space where the unconscious can express itself without pressure. The act of creating also gives the mind a chance to see the pattern in a new form, which can lead to fresh insight. A second everyday example deals with a conflict with a friend. Suppose 2 people argue over a small misunderstanding, and the tension feels larger than the issue itself. The guide asks the listener to look for the symbol that appears in the conflict. Perhaps the word shadow comes to mind. Jung used the term shadow to describe the parts of ourselves that we hide or deny. In this case, the conflict may be a chance to see a hidden fear of rejection. By naming the shadow, the person can speak calmly about the feeling, and the argument can move toward resolution. The process does not require a therapist, only a quiet willingness to notice the pattern and name it. The guide also shares a story from Jung's own teaching life. A young student once came to Jung, worried that his dreams were too strange to be useful. Jung told the student to write down 1 dream each night and to bring the notebook to the next meeting. He added, "Do not try to solve the dream now. Let the images settle like a stone in water. When you return, we will look at the ripples together." The student followed the advice, and over months the notebook filled with images that later revealed a clear theme of loss and renewal. This anecdote shows how a simple habit, guided by patience, can turn vague night pictures into a map of inner life. A modern anecdote illustrates how Jung's ideas have moved into the world of coaching. A performance coach named Maya uses archetype coaching with her clients. She asks each client to pick a mythic figure that feels familiar, such as the hero, the caregiver, or the explorer. The client then reflects on how that figure shows up in daily choices. One client, a software developer, chose the explorer archetype and began to schedule short learning walks after work, where he would read a short article on a new technology. The small walk kept his curiosity alive and prevented burnout. Maya explains that the archetype acts like a compass, pointing the client toward activities that feed the deeper part of the self. This story shows that Jung's concepts can be used in very practical, modern settings. The guide also presents 2 counterarguments that caution against taking the ideas too far. The first warning comes from a psychologist who noted that people can become trapped in endless analysis of every dream and symbol. When a person spends hours trying to decode a single image, the process can become a form of procrastination, keeping the person from acting in the world. The guide advises that the work of symbols should stay short and clear, and that once a useful insight is found, the person should move on to action. The second warning comes from a philosopher who argued that the unconscious can sometimes produce random images that have no deeper meaning. In those cases, searching for a hidden message may create false patterns, leading to confusion. The guide suggests that when a symbol feels forced, it is better to let it go and focus on the next clear sign. To keep the practice balanced, the guide offers a simple rule. For every 5 minutes spent noting a dream, spend 5 minutes doing something tangible. If a dream about a broken bridge appears, the listener might take 5 minutes to clean a cluttered space, symbolically repairing the bridge in the outer world. This rule helps keep the inner work connected to outer action, preventing the mind from staying stuck in endless interpretation. The narrator then returns to the radio analogy. When a listener first tunes a station, static may dominate. If the listener keeps turning the knob, the signal improves, but if they stay on a weak frequency, the music never becomes clear. In the same way, paying attention to symbols without any effort to understand them leaves the mind in static. Small, steady adjustments. Writing a dream, noting a symbol, reflecting on a conflict. Bring the inner voice into clearer focus. The guide also uses the plant analogy again to show how growth takes time. A seed does not become a tree overnight. It needs sunlight, water, and soil. The notebook is the soil. The daily pause is the sunlight. And the act of naming a symbol is the water. When all three are present, the inner life can grow strong. If any part is missing, the plant may wilt. The listener is invited to check each part each week, making sure the routine stays alive. A practical tip for the dream notebook is to include a simple rating system. After writing a dream, the listener can mark a number from 1 to 5 that shows how strong the feeling was. A high number signals that the dream may hold a powerful clue. Over weeks, patterns in the rating can emerge, pointing to topics that need more attention. This rating system is like a weather report for the inner world, giving a quick sense of the climate each night. Another tip is to create a symbol list. Each time a recurring image appears, the listener writes the image, the date, and a brief note about what was happening at the time. Over months, the list may reveal that certain symbols appear during stress, while others show up during moments of joy. This simple list acts like a map, showing where the inner terrain changes. The guide reminds the listener that the map is not the territory. It only points out places to explore further. The guide also suggests pairing the inner work with a simple physical activity. For example, after noting a dream, the listener might take a 10-minute walk, letting the mind wander while the body moves. This combination helps the unconscious settle, as movement can release tension that blocks insight. The walk is like a gentle wind that clears fog from a window, allowing the picture inside to become visible. A story from Jung's early career illustrates the power of pairing inner work with outer action. When Jung was a young doctor, a patient described a recurring dream of a locked door. Jung encouraged the patient to write the dream each night and, during the day, to try opening a real door that had been closed for years. A door to a childhood bedroom. When the patient finally opened the door, a wave of memory and emotion came through, and the patient reported feeling a sense of release. Jung used the physical act of opening the door as a mirror for the inner door in the dream. This anecdote shows how simple actions can echo the language of symbols. A modern coach, Alex, uses a similar technique with athletes. He asks each athlete to note a dream about a race, then to run a short sprint the next day, visualizing the finish line from the dream. The athletes report that the sprint feels more purposeful, as if the dream has given a clear target. Alex calls this REM-bodied dreaming, the idea that the body can help the mind understand symbols. This modern example shows that Jung's ideas can be adapted to many fields, from sports to business. The guide also presents a brief quote from Jung that fits the everyday theme. He wrote, Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. The guide explains that looking into the heart means paying attention to feelings, not just thoughts. By noting a feeling that pops up during a dream or a symbol, the listener can begin to see the hidden pattern. The quote is a reminder that the work is personal, not academic. Another quote from Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections is offered. He said, "Meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The guide uses this quote to illustrate the conflict example. When two friends argue, the emotional reaction can change both people, just as a chemical reaction changes the substances involved. By noticing the symbol of shadow in the conflict, each person can see how the reaction is shaping them and can choose to act with more awareness. The guide also mentions that not every symbol needs deep analysis. Sometimes a picture is just a picture, like a cloud that passes in the sky. The listener is encouraged to trust intuition. If a symbol feels heavy, it may be worth exploring. If it feels light, it may be left as is. This balanced approach helps avoid the trap of overanalysis warned about earlier. To help the listener practice balance, the guide proposes a three-step check. First, write down the symbol. Second, ask if the feeling is strong or weak. Third, decide whether to explore further or move on. This check is quick, like a traffic light, telling the mind when to stop and when to go. It keeps the practice from becoming a marathon of thought. A final practical tip is to share the insights with a trusted friend. Talking about a dream or a symbol can bring new angles, as another mind may see a pattern that was missed. The guide reminds the listener to choose a friend who listens without judgment, much like a garden that welcomes rain without demanding anything in return. Sharing can also strengthen relationships, turning the inner work into a social benefit. In closing, the narrator reminds the listener that Jung's ideas are tools, not rules. The tools work best when used gently, like a radio dial turned slowly, or a plant watered regularly. By keeping a dream notebook, noting recurring symbols, reflecting on daily events, and staying aware of the limits of analysis, the listener can bring a quiet depth to everyday life. The stories of Jung's student, the modern archetype coach, the doctor who opened a locked door, and the performance coach who uses myth all show that the same simple steps can fit many lives. The listener is invited to try one step today, perhaps by writing down a dream, and to see where the quiet voice of the unconscious leads.